Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a class of Kohelet and Mishlei. I'm hoping that you'll ask me some questions today, so I'll know that you're really paying attention. I'm expecting some people from different parts of the country to sit in, but I'm not sure I recognize them. So let's see. Let's go to the celebrities first. I think it's Jeffrey. You're my right? That would be you. Okay. And who else is sitting in on the class? May I ask your name? Oh, she can't hear me? Okay, I was hoping to see a friend of mine from San Antonio. Okay, anyway.
I'm here, Susan Belden.
Oh, Susan, I didn't recognize you. Oh my goodness.
Hold up.
You teenagers look different every time.
Yes.
Oh, I see. You are so
Wow, yes. Okay.
Oh. Good. Well, I'm glad you could sit on the class. Wonderful.
Well, thank you for including me.
Absolutely, no problem. So this is right now, we're going to examine some ideas and show how they disperse all through Judaism. Okay, so last week we just talked briefly. If you look on top of the page, number 24, you see that verse? Okay, one who spares his rod hates his child, but he who loves him disciplines him in his youth. Okay, now this is King Solomon. He was brilliant, he was gifted, and we have to understand when he speaks, he's speaking on many different levels. Okay, so here's what's going on. Now we know from the Bible, King David was pretty much rejected by his entire family. They somehow didn't have much confidence in him. And I told a story last week when the prophet Samuel came to anoint a king. God told him, go to the house of Jesse or Yishai, and one of his sons will be chosen as the new king of Israel. So when Samuel goes to the house of Jesse, who was a very spiritual man, he had 7 sons, and each time he was introduced to one of Jesse's sons, he said, this must be who God had in mind as the next king of Israel, because they were very impressive. Everything about them looked just perfect. They had classical looks, and they were very intelligent. They were very tall and handsome. And each time he hears God speak to him and say, no, this is not who I had in mind. And one after another of Jesse's sons are being rejected. And then Samuel says, is there anyone else? And Jesse says, well, I have another son, but definitely not what you'd be interested in. And Samuel says, that's okay. Call him. And where was he? He was taking care of the sheep. He was a shepherd. So David walks in, and Samuel takes a look and says, he's not really what God would want. Okay, he doesn't have the amazing characteristics that you would expect in a king. Very, very kingly, if you wish. And God says, this is the one I want. And Samuel is shocked. And when he tells Jesse, the father, this is who God wants, the father is shocked, and the entire family cannot believe the one son who they really felt had no talent or no ability or no gift was the one chosen by God. And so God says to Samuel, you see, the difference between you and myself is you as human beings judge people by the way they look. But that's not really what it's all about. God says, I look at the person's heart. David is the one who has the heart he is the one who will be the finest leader of the Jewish people. Okay, now remember, David is not going to be perfect, and neither is anyone else in the Bible. And probably none of us are perfect, and that's okay. We're human, we're not perfect. But the point is that David, who had been pretty much rejected by his entire family for whatever reason, now wants to be more loving to his own children. and therefore what he was doing is he was never rebuking his children for what they were doing or not doing. And in the end, it turned out to be a disaster. Two of his children turned against him. The two that he treated so well, one of them tried to kill him because they both wanted to be the king of Israel. So this is what we have here. It doesn't mean that you have to hit the child, but what it does mean, you have to tell the child when he is out of line. You let him know that he or she can reach a higher standard, and that's what King Solomon who's saying, because he remembers his father David, and David's mistake was he never castigated his children, and it turned out to be quite a very sad story when David is in great danger. One of his sons, Absalom, is going to kill him if necessary, and another son named Adonijah is hoping in a very quiet way to take over the kingdom while David was still alive. And so this is what King Solomon is reminding us, something that he learned from his father's experience, that unless we remind children at any stage, boys or girls, that you could have done a lot better. You don't have to hit them, but you do have to remind them. And at times, if they feel bad, it's good. It's good that they feel bad, because this will affect their growth as good human beings. Okay, you have to think to yourself, for instance, that if a child likes to run into traffic, a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, and you want to just say to the child, don't do that again, that might be a big mistake. Sometimes a child needs a little something, a little potch, just as a reminder, you don't run out into traffic, and you don't put your hands on the hot stove. There are things you sometimes have to, be very, make yourself quite clear that there's certain things that are acceptable and certain things that are not. Okay, and this is the point. And it's not only for children, it's even for adults. We need to be reminded that we could have done better. And again, the Jewish perspective is not to make people feel bad. It's to make them realize they could have done made a better choice. Okay, that somebody with your special qualities should have chosen to do the better choice instead of the choice that was the easiest to do. So again, that's what we're learning from the verse. This is from Proverbs, that there are times you have to talk to people in a loving way, but they must know that they cannot just simply live their lives without anyone rebuking them or reminding them that they acted improperly. Okay, that's the wisdom that, and of course, don't emphasize using the rod, hitting. That's not an appropriate thing to hit, using the rod, or using physical discipline. That is not really what works. But the parent or the teacher must let the child know that they could have reached a better level. Okay, so now let's go to verse 25. We did this last week, but it's good. And here's the answer to why 1/3 of America is obese. Here we're going to see the reason. And 1/3 is quite overweight. And 1/3 is of normal weight, but that's because they're still smoking. So that was a joke. But here's what it says. It says, a righteous person eats to satisfy his soul. It could mean her soul as well. But the stomach of the wicked will always lack. Okay, what this means is that a person who has a good spiritual background realizes that we can either use food or alcohol or anything else as something that serves our needs to make our lives better, or we can become the slave of food or alcohol or anything else. And the point that is mentioned many times throughout the Talmud is that the harder you try to fill your hunger, okay, or even if you want to sleep all the time, the more you sleep, the more you keep eating chocolates, and you believe that when you eat this chocolate, your hunger will dissipate. It doesn't work. The easiest thing is simply to say, this is how much I need to eat, and I will let it, and that's where I stop. If you do that, you will not really feel hungry all the time. And we've seen this in our own experience, that if you're eating a meal and the phone rings and you go to talk on the phone for a minute, by the time you get back, you don't really feel hungry anymore because you made a little interval between your appetite and the food itself. Okay, so this is the point about people knowing how much they can satisfy themselves, how much is healthy, and how much is unhealthy. Okay, but the point made is that the wicked, the people who don't really care to live a righteous life, but who want to have physical pleasure, they're never really going to be happy because there's no end to how much we can want, whether it's food or alcohol or anything else. Okay, we're now ready for chapter 14. Everyone ready? Any questions? Don't anyone speak a broken English or anything, please? That's what I'd like to hear. Okay, Aznish, let's go to chapter 14. Let's find out about what King Solomon knows about women. Okay, he says, verse 1, the wise among women each builds her house, but the foolish one tears it down with her hands. Okay, meaning that he's saying there are two kinds of women. The one, the wise woman is who builds up her house. She makes her house, a reflection of what's right and proper, and she's very good to her family. All this is very good. She builds up her house, but there is another kind of woman who tears down her house because of her foolishness. And I did give the example, and maybe Jeffrey will remember it, of there was a very rich man who was related to Moses. His name was Korach. He was a first cousin to Moses and Aaron. And his wife told him that there was no reason why he should be second to them, why should they be the leaders of the Jewish people when he had everything that they had and he had a lot of money. That's even better. So he decides to lead the Jewish people into a new state of democracy where everybody is equal, and there is no such thing as Moses being the spiritual guide or Aaron being the high priest. Everybody is the leader, everybody is the high priest, and it ends up as a disaster because God did not like what he was doing. He was really not sincere. I guess that's a shock to you to know in politics, some people are not sincere. But what was going on is he really felt he could win the people over, and he did, because he promised the people whatever they wanted to hear is what he promised them. But the Bible says that God was not happy with what was going on, and there was an earthquake which opened up, and that solved the problem for Korach, who just wanted to be number one. And of course, I think the point we can see from this is too much ambition can be a very destructive force. Okay, now there are women who can build their house, and that's very good. And King Solomon will talk about them at the end of his book in chapter 30, The Woman of Valor, Eshet Chayil. He will talk about her, all the things she does for her husband and her children. And but he says there are women who are not of that ilk. There are the good women and there are the bad women, and you have to be careful in terms of which one becomes the head of your house. Okay. Let's go to another verse. And let's see what we can learn from it. I'd like you to see number 6 for a moment. Do you see it on your screen? It says, the scoffer seeks wisdom, yet there is none. But wisdom will come easily to the understanding one. Now, do we all know what a scoffer is? Somebody who scoffs at anything they hear. They think everything that's said is foolish, and they poo-poo everything. But when the scoffer believes that he or she understands what's right from what's wrong, it's not going to happen. They're too busy belittling every other idea that comes their way, that when the time comes for them to have a philosophy of life, to a way to choose that will help them, it doesn't work, because they're too busy belittling everyone else. And in the end, they have no one to look up to. So whatever wisdom they think they have, that wisdom will really not get them very far, and it will lead them into very unfortunate situations. So, so there's a very beautiful story in the Talmud about a man came to the rabbi and said he was reading a statement in the book of Daniel, where in the book of Daniel it says that God gives wisdom to the wise. Okay, that's what it says. And so this man asked the rabbi, he said, well, wouldn't it be better if God gave wisdom to the stupid, because they could use the wisdom? Why should God give wisdom? And that was the question. It's a very good question. And the rabbi explained that if you give wisdom to a foolish person, they're going to spend all their time, at sporting events. They're going to spend all their time, just entertaining themselves. They're not going to make a contribution to society because they're too busy trying to entertain. But a person who really wants wisdom, that person is going to do something for society with the wisdom. Okay, and in fact, because the wisdom, we're told in the Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot, who is wise? The person who's willing to listen to everyone, to learn from everyone. That person is going to have wisdom and will benefit society, because they don't look down on people. They listen. They know everybody has something to teach, and therefore, the idea is go to the people, see what they can tell you. There is such a thing as wisdom that leads you in a good direction, and unfortunately, there is the foolishness that can truly hurt you very deeply. And of course, you see that going on now with the COVID situation. All the people who insist that you should never wear a mask because it only creates problems. It's healthier not to do that. And they insist on it, and they insist that you must never tell them to wear a mask because it infringes on their freedom. And the number of people who feel this way is very large. And I guess many of them showed up in Washington not on January the 6th, and they'll show up again, I would suspect, on the 20th for the inauguration. And these are people who just they just feel they know better, and because somebody told them that you don't need a mask, you don't need to do social distancing, you don't need any of that, and they're ignoring the fact that the doctors are saying you do need to be careful, and they're ignoring the fact that we see that people who went to these political rallies where nobody wore masks pretty much had terrible results. So this is the point. The wisdom of the clever is going to really make a difference in society. They're going to help people because they know what works, what's good, and the scoffer, because he laughs at everyone, is going to really be self-destructive. Okay. Now, look at number 10, where it says, the heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger will share in its joy. It's an amazing statement. We all know what troubles we've been through, okay? And when those troubles are solved, when we get to a good answer to these problems, the joy that you feel nobody could else understand it. Your joy is something that is not that nobody can understand what that means. Just like nobody understands how sad you can feel about things that don't work out. You know, when you're bitter because you had hoped for better, but it didn't happen. And nobody really understands that. They just get the general idea. Nobody really understands when you are in a state of joy, why you're so joyous. They don't understand it, but you know, and that's the point. You have to find a way to to reach happiness in your own life, and to realize what is available. Okay, what can be done, what how to make life a better place. Okay, looking a little bit further. Um, Number 12, there is a way that seems right to a man or to a person, but at its end are the ways of death. Meaning that sometimes people look at a situation and it looks very promising. Okay, it's easy to do, and everyone seems to do it, and they like it. And but because of that attitude, it can lead to a terrible, terrible situation, a catastrophe. I know in counseling, it's very common for a person to come to a rabbi or a clergyman and say their situation is so bad it can never get worse. Well, big mistake. It can get worse. They just don't imagine it could get worse, and then they do things that have made their situation just unbelievably terrible because they were using their imagination at a limited level and didn't realize you can really, really make things a lot worse. So, you know, try and solve the problem. And you'll see in the writings of King Solomon, he says always there's look for somebody, look for a good friend, you know, look for a good spouse, look for somebody who is going to help you solve these problems instead of create problems for you. Okay. Uh, let's go for a minute to verse 15. Are there any questions out there? Anyone? No? Okay. It's okay to speak up. Number 15 says, a fool believes anything, but a clever person understands it correctly. Wow. What this means is that, you know, a person who believes everything, and there are people like that, that is going to lead to a big, big, you know, terrible situation. You know, for instance, every so often we hear of, you know, aliens coming to Earth, right? And they're taking over and they're hiding underground, and they're going to take over the, you know, they're going to be in charge of the world and all that. And of course, if you believe something like that, and some people believe everything and anything, that could be a terrible result. But a smart person knows you don't believe something just because you heard it. Just because the person said it with conviction doesn't mean it's right. And you have to know when you should believe and when you should not believe. And if it's not something that's in your way of looking at life, if you normally do not live in a world where you think that Martians have taken over, and or you know, it's wise not to believe just because somebody told you that. There are a lot of people, unfortunately, who will believe anything and everything, and this is what we want to get away from. Okay, so let me just give you some more insight into what King Solomon is saying in both books. And here's the point that I'd like to make, and that is one of the most basic messages of our religion is called measure for measure, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Now, what does that mean? Well, recently I was giving a talk and I asked the following question. I said, when God was making a miracle for the Jewish people at the Red Sea, and it was and God was going to make save the Jewish people from the Egyptians by having the waters turn to separate, and the Jewish people would get to safety. I said, why doesn't God do the same thing for the Egyptians? Because if they're separated, so the Egyptians cannot do any harm to the Jewish people. Why should God make a miracle for one group and not for the other? Why is it that the Egyptians are going to drown in the Red Sea? Why doesn't God just save them? Because if he saves them, then everybody's happy. The Jewish people will escape, and the Egyptians cannot hurt them. That was the question I asked, and I've asked that of children. I've asked it of adults. And here's what you need to know: God does not make a miracle for somebody who is a scoundrel. The Egyptians, as you know, were drowning Jewish babies. Okay, that's how the beginning of Exodus starts. They were doing that. And by doing that, they sealed their own doom. God was not going to save their lives after they were drowning innocent people, because we believe in something called measure for measure. What you do to others will come back to you. And this is what the Egyptians had done. They had acted terribly to Jewish people. And so God was not going to save them. And in fact, they drowned others. They in turn will be drowned. This is one of the most basic ideas found anywhere in Judaism: measure for measure. We can trace that idea to a story at Purim time, when we meet up with an evil man named Haman, who has decided not only will he destroy all the Jewish people, but in addition, he is going to personally hang the man he hates the most, named Mordecai. He hates Mordecai, and Mordecai will be hanged off of a 50 cubit tree, okay, or gallows. And as you're going to find out, what Haman planned to do to Mordecai did not work. In fact, Haman ended up hanged on those gallows. Again, that's an example of a measure for measure, a midah keneged midah. If you go to the writings of the great Rabbi Hillel in the Ethics of the Fathers, you will come across that same idea. It's so basic to our religion. And it says as follows in the second chapter: Hillel was once walking with his adult students along the edge of a river. It was the time of the Romans, and they were very brutal. And Hillel saw a skull floating in the river. And Hillel addressed the skull, and he had something to say. Now, I don't think Hillel knew who that person was, but he said the following to the skull so that all of his adult students would understand. He says, because you have drowned others, you have been drowned as well. Measure for measure. You drowned innocent people. That's why you too have been drowned. And Hillel goes on to say, and those who drowned you, who should not have done that either, they too will come to the same punishment. So this is really what we have to understand is going on throughout the entire Bible. And if you get to synagogue, or you open up this week's Torah portion, which is in Exodus, it's the section called Bo, and it deals with Moses going to Pharaoh and warning him what's going to happen unless Pharaoh allows the Jewish people to leave, and Pharaoh refusing to learn a lesson. And numbers 8, 9, and 10 are going to happen, the plagues, and each one was measure for measure. Okay, that everything that was happening was going to be meaning that the Egyptians will be punished for the cruelty they bestowed on the Jewish people, and the Jewish people were going to learn the idea that cruelty does not pay, and eventually whoever does that is going to pay a terrible penalty for acting in such a fashion, in exploiting their fellow man or woman. And this is what I think you're going to see, and that's what I wanted to share with you for today. Sometimes you cannot remember every little statement made by a great thinker, but you can get a basic concept, and that's the one I want you to know. It's called measure for measure. What you do to others will come back to you. Maybe not immediately, but ultimately it will happen. And I give you the example of Moses, who as a very young man tried to save the Jewish people. Okay. And in the process, he got into big trouble and he had to run from Egypt as a criminal. He had to run away. And his reward was for doing the right thing, that many years later, God was going to pick him to be the person who would save the Jewish people. He tried it when he was young, it didn't work, but God never forgot what he was trying to do. Later on, he would now be the leader of the Jewish people, take them out of slavery and suffering, take them through a 40-year trek in the wilderness. And the end would be that the Jewish people would survive, and we would, that as a result, we're here today. Are there any questions from the peanut gallery? Is that the word? Anybody have anything to say? Well, we're going to finish up in about 30 seconds, but I want to say, Susan, I didn't recognize you. I thought you were some teenager. So that's good. Anyway, Jeffrey, Jeffrey's very quiet, but you
very
can,
nice class. Thank you.
It was
okay,
very nice.
when you see me, you can either stop me in person or call me on the phone. I'll try and answer any of your questions. But this is what we're dealing with here. The wisdom of one of the most brilliant people in history who was blessed by God with wisdom. And it's a question of catching the main principles of what he's saying. So remember, measure for measure, what we do to others is going to come back to us. Okay, so it always pays to do the right thing. Okay, the people who don't do the right thing, and there are plenty of them, they're plenty. They will learn their lesson perhaps too late. Okay, have a pleasant week, everybody.
Thank you so much for including me.
Of course, and my best to Brad and the family. All right.
Okay, take care and be safe.